Hey guys, welcome back. Tisha here, back for another chapter reading for The Polygamist Daughter by Anna LeBaron. Go ahead and do me a favor and hit the like button as we jump into chapter 14. We were on our way home from another long workday. I sat in the middle seat of the station wagon next to Celia and closed my eyes where I rested my head on her shoulder. My job had changed from babysitter to appliance scrubber, and I was exhausted. It seemed like I had to use every muscle in my body that day. Mom's voice interrupted my brief respite. Who wants to go gardening? We do. The mood in the car shifted immediately from sheer exhaustion to energized excitement. Me personally, if I was that exhausted, I don't think I would want to go gardening, but I guess for them, this was a switch up, so they wanted it. Mom drove the few blocks to the Safeway grocery store, making her way to the rear parking lot and finally behind the building where the giant blue dumpster was located. I breathed a sigh of relief when I saw that only two spotlights were shining above the service entrance of the store. The other two bulbs must have burned out. My brother Hiram and I were designated gardeners, and the dimmer light would lessen our danger of being caught. Okay, so gardening isn't actually gardening. Gardening seems to be like rummaging through the dumpster, but I guess we'll see. Mom swung a wide path in front of the dumpster next to the double doors where the deliveries were received. With great precision, she backed up and stopped close to the dumpster. Herbert jumped out of the passenger seat and opened the station wagon's rear window, and we kids climbed out silently. We knew the drill from previous excursions to various grocery stores. As stealthily as a SWAT team, we took our pre-appointed positions. Herbert helped Hiram and me up onto the tailgate of the station wagon. Then Herbert and Sean lifted the heavy metal lids of the dumpster. A stench immediately filled the air. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Celia covering her nose and mouth with her hand, and I flashed her a big grin. She rolled her eyes in return. Celia hated gardening, my family's code name for dumpster diving. She couldn't stand the smell or even the thought of rifling through garbage, but more than anything, she feared getting caught. I found everything about the experience exhilarating, but mostly I couldn't wait to savor the spoils. Before I knew it, Hiram had hoisted himself up and over the top of the dumpster and disappeared from sight. You're next, Herbert whispered. He squatted in front of the tailgate and hoisted me up until I could reach the edge of the dumpster opening. I swung my legs over and dropped inside. My eyes adjusted quickly to the shadowy darkness inside the dumpster, and Hiram and I got to work. We knew the rest of our family would serve as lookouts and signal if someone walked or drove by, or far worse, if someone from the store came out of the service entrance. The exit plan was always the same: find a place to hide either inside or outside the dumpster. I found a wide, flat box of overripe oranges. I leaned in for a quick whiff of the sweet smelling fruit before I hefted the box over my head to Herbert, who was standing next to the container. Hiram and I worked quickly, sifting through packaging, old newspapers, boxes, and bins to find anything salvageable to eat. Anna, Hiram hissed with excitement. Shh! I reprimanded him for being too loud. I found a crate you're going to want to see. He held it proudly at waist level, his eyes beckoning me to take a peek. This had better be worth it, I muttered as I picked my way over a couple of mounds of garbage. It is. I peered into the box. Ice cream. I placed my hand on one of the two cartons, not exactly freezing, but still cold. I grinned at Hiram. Oh, I hope one of them is chocolate. Hiram stacked up some boxes from the crate and carefully leaned over the top of the dumpster and handed them to Herbert. I found a couple of gallon containers of milk in a corner. They were past the expiration date, but so was almost anything in the dumpster. As Mom said, those labels were guidelines the government required. They didn't mean the food was bad, just that the store couldn't legally sell them anymore. Why should we let it go to waste? Y'all, my son, when he learned about the whole dates and stuff on things, it was to the point where you would go in the fridge to go get something and it would be gone because it was past the date. Like, he didn't waste any time when he was little to throw that stuff out. So I'm reading this and that's what I'm thinking about. Meanwhile, they're over here feeling like it's like a pot of gold. So things you take for granted. Why should we let it go to waste? We don't mind eating around the bruised spots in the banana or downing yogurt that tasted a little tangier than what most people enjoyed. These buried treasures added variety to our meager, mundane diet. Scraping my leg on the corroded metal and getting rest on my hands while going in and out of the dumpster was a small sacrifice for a usually big payoff. I continued my search. Suddenly, I stepped on something squishy, and I knew I'd found something good. I backed up a step, squatted, and peered into the darkness. Bananas. I love the sweet smell and taste of overripe bananas, though truthfully, I'd never eaten a perfectly ripe one in my life. I tossed aside the two that I'd accidentally squashed then when I stepped on them, but I picked up the rest of the bananas and passed it over the opening to Herbert. Right at that moment, I heard hushed warnings. Someone was coming. Hiram and I hunked down. I hoped whoever had interrupted our mission wouldn't catch us stealing. I was looking forward to the bananas and half melted ice cream. It's okay, Herbert whispered. It was just a car going by. No one saw us. Thank goodness. It was just a car going by? Thank goodness. Although it had never happened yet, I knew that Mom would have to drive off temporarily, leave us in the dumpster if someone surprised her. All in all, it was a good night of gardening. Hiram and I had harvested 2 large boxes of apples, oranges, and bananas, 2 6-packs of yogurt, 3 gallons of milk, several cartons of sour cream and cottage cheese, and of course, the coveted box that contained the 2 half-gallons of ice cream. Hiram hoisted me to the top of the dumpster, and I grabbed Herbert's hands to be guided back onto the tailgate of the station wagon. The 10 of us squeezed back into the car, holding the large boxes on our laps for the drive home. A variety of smells permeated the car, and we chattered about what we would eat first. Because we had found the ice cream, Hiram and I were heroes. Although it was strawberry instead of chocolate, it was delicious. We passed the containers around the car and took turns drinking the half-melted treat, finishing it all before we got home. Once there, we each carried a box into the tiny kitchen. Mom and Teresa quickly doled out the containers of yogurt, and Celia handed out spoons. During the handoff, my spoon clattered to the dirty floor. I didn't care. I picked it up, wiped it on my even filthier jeans, and waited for my yogurt. My family and I devoured everything that night except for a couple cartons of sour cream and cottage cheese. Both would be great on sandwiches the following day, enhancing the bean and mayonnaise combination. We didn't go gardening as much as I would have liked, only a couple times a week, but when the opportunity came, I always rose to the occasion. So I'm over here thinking gardening is something completely different when gardening for her is a way of getting other food. Things that some of us might, or most of us wouldn't even want to eat or would feel sick at the thought of eating. They're over here taking joy and being thankful for. Chapter 15. The summer dragged on, with each week the same. Although it was wonderful not to have to go to the warehouse on Sunday, there were plenty of regular chores to do around the house. Wednesdays always seemed like the longest to me, maybe because they marked the halfway point of the week. On one particular Wednesday, my muscles were especially sore from chipping gunk off of a disgusting trade-in stove for hours. All I wanted to do was go home and fall into bed. I followed Celia to the station wagon and squeezed between her and Hiram. With Yolanda and Teresa and their children, there were 12 passengers. As she exited the parking lot, Mom announced, "Who wants to go gift boxing tonight?" What's gift boxing? If gardening is digging in the trash, what's gift boxing? I guess we'll see, right? The response was both immediate and enthusiastic. Yes! Next to gardening, gift boxing at a Goodwill collection bin was our favorite after work pastime, okay? Digging through bags of clothing was definitely less smelly and cleaner than rummaging in a dumpster. For efficiency, the strategy was to grab as many bags of clothing as we could transport home, where we would sort through the bags to see what fit. Odds were we would all have new clothes by the end of the night, and what didn't fit would be returned to the donation bin. Oh, so they go to the stores. If you leave stuff in the drop box outside the stores that they can grab, they grab it, take it home, and then bring back the other stuff. That way they don't have to pay for it. Quiet down, please. Mom raised her voice to be heard. We're almost there, and we don't want to announce our arrival. The station wagon bounced along through the North Glen, a suburb of Denver, before Mom pulled over to the side of the road, a couple blocks from the Kmart parking lot, our destination. She adjusted the rearview mirror so she could see me. Let's go through everything again, Anna. I swallowed and nodded dutifully. I was the designated driver because I was the only one in the car who could fit through the small opening in the receptacle. When we get there, I'll back up right to the front of the bin. And what do you do? I felt all eyes on me in that moment. And I stammered, well, Huber will lift me to the opening. I look in to see how many bags of clothes there are. If there are enough, I climb in. If not, we'll go to a different one. And why is that? I have to have enough bags to stack on top of each other to be able to reach the opening to climb back out. Yeah, you don't want to get stuck in there, Herbert laughed. Mom glared at him. So they're not even taking stuff from outside. They're literally pushing their body in the bin. Y'all, this is a lot. Mom glared at him so I didn't have to. Then what? Then I start handing bags to you and Yolanda. How many? As many as I can, still leaving enough to stack into a pile. Mom smiled her approval. What happens if somebody comes into the parking lot? You'll drive away, but you'll come back to get me. Though I made this statement without hesitation, I must have sounded as though I questioned her. Of course I will. But what do you do? I stay as quiet as possible so the people won't hear me. Good, Anna. It's important that you don't get caught in there, okay? She readjusted the mirror and drove toward the parking lot. Okay, kids, it's time to shop. She got out the car and opened the side door for me. Let's not sit here and act like they're not breaking all types of laws doing this. And part of me wants to condemn them, the mama, because why are you teaching your kids how to steal? And then part of me is like, would we consider this a survival mode thing or not? I'm really questioning this whole situation here. Y'all tell me your thoughts. I crawled over Celia and Kathleen and followed Herbert to the back of the station wagon. He opened the rear door and I climbed up on the tailgate. As my brother hoisted me up to the opening, he whispered, "How do things look?" I see lots and lots of bags. This bin is a really good one. The clothes are probably already in bags, but let me know if you need a couple of paper sacks. And don't try to sort through anything. We don't have enough time for that. Herbert lifted me even higher so I could climb in. I rested my forearms on the thin metal opening, which felt like it would slice my arms open. I took a deep breath. There was no turning back because my family was counting on me. I squeezed my eyes shut and hoisted myself and dived through the narrow slit. I landed on a couple of plastic bags filled with soft clothes. When I opened my eyes, I couldn't see much more than I could with them shut. I waited a few moments for my eyes to adjust to the dim lit stream through the dim light streaming through the street light through the narrow opening. I rubbed the sore spots on my forearms, where bolts from the bin had left indentations. Everything okay in there? Herbert's voice sounded far away. I stood up quickly, trying to keep my balance on the shifting bags underneath me. Yes, I'm about to start handing you stuff. My voice, soft, echoed off the metal walls and sounded kind of cool. Under other circumstances, my siblings and I could have had fun playing in such a place, but not under these conditions. I just wanted to select bags and get out of there before the police came or someone dropped off a donation. I hefted a few bags through the opening to Herbert, who whispered, "Got it," with each handoff. I touched one bag and felt something wet and sticky. Since I couldn't see what it is, I quickly tossed it aside and wiped my hands on my pants before I moved to another. I worked quickly, talking to Herbert only when absolutely necessary. By now I could see pretty well. I tried to keep my mind on the task, but my heart tugged in different directions. I remember asking Mom one time why we couldn't buy clothes in a store like other kids did. What I didn't ask was why we had to scrounge through shirts and pants and jackets that people didn't want anymore. She told me that we have to sacrifice for God's kingdom and that the money had to go for much more important things than something as superficial as fancy clothes. I should just be grateful. She should just be grateful, but you're over here teaching her how to steal when technically it sounds like you all did have the funds, you just spent it on something else. I recall our class pictures that year at school. I had selected a pair of faded jeans and a tan shirt with multicolored horizontal stripes, the nicest one I had. I watched as other girls walked into the classroom. Two styles ruled the day: flowing bohemian blouses paired with cute jeans, or jewel tone velour tops and designer jeans. Most girls had their hair feathered Farrah Fawcett style, while I waited in line with my classmates to be photographed. The girl in front of me turned and asked, "Didn't you know it was picture day today?" I nodded. "Then why would you wear that?" I crossed my arms over the front of my hand-me-down shirt and bowed my head in shame. Tonight I hoped I find something good in this bin. I lifted sack after sack of clothing over my head, flattening some of the bags to squeeze them in through the opening. I couldn't hear Herbert catching them on the other side. Finally, I heard him say, "Anna, that's enough." I stacked several bags to create a squishy pyramid, climbed to the top, and peered out of the opening. Herbert standing below. "Can you pull yourself up?" "I think so." I placed a worn sweatshirt I found at the bottom of the collection bin over the base of the thin metal opening so I wouldn't cut my forearms, and hoisted myself up once more. I wiggled through the opening into Herbert's waiting arms. "Great job, sis. This is a really good haul for one stop. We have a lot to go through when we get home." Mission accomplished. And maybe I'd find a pretty shirt and a designer pair of jeans that fit me. We each held a bag of clothes in our laps for the drive home. Gift boxing was like Christmas to us. Actually, it was better since our family rarely celebrated that pagan holiday. When we arrived home, we placed the bags in a large pile on the living room floor. Mom, Yolanda, and Teresa began opening the bags one by one and holding up items for everyone to see. We were always told to stay calm during this process, but what usually happened is we'd all see a potentially nice article of clothing, like a cute shirt or denim skirt, and we'd begin clamoring for it. The adults always got the final say about who got what, and they gave the better items to the most favored kids. Sometimes I would see something I thought was really cute, but because there were so many girls who wore the same size, I hardly dared to hope I might actually end up getting up to keep that item. Most of the time, we got things by sheer luck, depending on which of the women held up the article of clothing and which girl was in good favor with her. I'm gonna tell y'all like this: after I'm diving in a dumpster, um, after I'm sliding through a hole of the donation box and having indentations in my arms and having to put clothing there so I don't get cut up, the least you could do is let me get a item that I want. I'm just saying. But that's just my thoughts. After the sister wives had divided up all the clothing among the kids, we were all allowed to trade with each other as long as the items fit. If I really like something someone else had, I might have to trade 2 or 3 items to get it. That particular night, Mom sifted through the next to last bag and pulled out a bright red piece of fabric. She held up a scarlet polyester bell-bottom jumpsuit that zipped up front. I just have to have it. Please say, Anna. I repeated silently over and over until I heard my mom say, Anna, this looks like it might fit you. I beamed at her and caught the jumpsuit as she tossed it my way. I hurried from my spot on the floor to go try it on. It fit perfectly. Everyone congratulated me on such a great haul of clothes that night. I thanked them, but I was most excited about my red jumpsuit. I nearly wore it out the first month. After wearing it to school a dozen times, I realized how risky that was. What if some girl recognized my new jumpsuit as one of her cast-offs? I would never have lived that down. I figured out why I liked that outfit so much. Herbert had an Olivia Newton-John record album with a striking photograph of the singer sitting on a wooden rocking horse on the back cover. She was wearing a bright red zipper jumpsuit like mine. I always imagined I looked like her when I wore my red jumpsuit. It was an odd dichotomy, given that we were supposed to be super spiritual people. Herbert had bought that album, one of the many things he kept hidden from my mother, with its worldly cover photo, which put the idea of such fashion in my head. My excitement took me back to a similar night before I was old enough to go gift boxing. When the bags of clothes were divided up at home, I ended up with a cute pink and gray plaid dress with a tie at the neck, which I remember begging my mom to let me wear for school picture day. She refused because the dress had a V-neck and needed to be modified with a triangle of white fabric at the neckline, since modesty was paramount in the polygamist culture. I am wearing that dress in my photograph on the cover of this book. Our clothes were certainly fancy. Our clothes certainly weren't fancy, but I could usually find something I liked. 2 days after the gift boxing, Mom picked me up from school so we could go by the Goodwill donation bin to drop off the donation of clothes that didn't work for the family. It seemed strange seeing the bin in the daytime. The hypocrisy of piously making donations of our stolen goods was lost on me. Exactly. According to my father, lawbreaking and lawlessness were justified because the U.S. government and the culture were both corrupt. The disciples who followed him were God's chosen people, which meant we could go outside the normal bounds of rules and regulations. The ends justify the means. Although at times I was worried about getting caught stealing, I kept my concerns to myself. Insane, right? That's a lot. The fact that you're going through all of that and you're making excuses for it because your father says that, the U.S. is so corrupt. It's just, like she said, a bunch of hypocrisy. Chapter 17. Interacting with so many family members was fascinating and maddening. My sisters, including step and half siblings, and I learned much about the culture of polygamy by observing the interaction among the sister wives. We absorbed things by listening to conversations conducted in our hushed tones. Over time, we discovered which sister wives to avoid. Some were simply mean or downright cruel, and others used their status to dominate. In polygamy, I always say this wrong. The hierarchy. Y'all, I can't pronounce it right now. Alexa, how do you pronounce Hierarchical?
Okay, here's pronunciations. It is pronounced as hierarchical.
Hierarchical. I still don't think I said it right. Ranking rules everything. The first wife is not only revered by her husband, but also feared by the second and third, and additional sister wives married to the same man. Another, Rather, odd phenomenon occurred with regard to disciplining children. The sister wives felt free and empowered to discipline the children of other members of the group, with one exception. No one dared discipline the children of the wives who were higher than they were in the pecking order. See, that alone sounds wrong, because if you're a first wife, then that means nobody's supposed to discipline your kids. How about y'all all focus on your own kids? That way the discipline is fair, because this system alone seems like it's not. In our family unit, that meant Sheila Jordan's children had immunity from any correction. Another sister wife would not lift a hand or speak a harsh word to them without fear of retribution. I began to view our time in Denver as a form of slavery. Every child labor law was violated indiscriminately. We lived our own sort of indentured nightmare under the rule of Dan Jordan, my father's right hand man. Dan controlled everything while my father was in prison. I struggle most whenever Dan's children work in the warehouse. Everyone gave his kids preferential treatment. My siblings and I were hired help, receiving either low or no pay. Of course, we had no choice in the matter. Ervil's children dutifully followed two unspoken rules when it came to the Jordan children: don't discuss the injustices and don't dwell on the unfairness. God wouldn't like that kind of selfish attitude, because it wouldn't help grow his kingdom. We just did what we were told, and nobody said anything. You most certainly didn't complain to Dan Jordan or anyone in the family about it. Dawn Jordan was exactly 3 days older than I was. Though we belonged to the same religious group and spent the vast majority of our time at the same places around the same people, our lives differed greatly. Dawn and I wore different colors, different clothes. Mine were from Goodwill collection bins or an occasional more stylish hand-me-down from an older sibling. Dawn's clothes came from local department stores, and her new outfits matched right down to her shoes. So you're the leader's daughter, and y'all are living poorly. Meanwhile, the people who are working in the same place as you aren't. What's wrong with this system here? And I'm not saying that they should be put above, but you would think that they would at least be treated the same. From time to time, Dawn invited me to spend time at her house, and her sister Joyce would invite Celia over. We never reciprocated. Truth was, I wouldn't have dreamed of inviting her into our home. I couldn't imagine the humiliation of having her see the squalor that we lived in. But I always enjoyed going to the Jordan's house. Their sprawling home was situated on lots of land in Bennett, Colorado. Their children were involved in Future Farmers of America and after-school pursuits that took time and cost money, things that we didn't have. Their house had a central vacuum system and intercom, which Sheila used to call her kids downstairs to dinner. Their house was beautifully furnished, while ours contained garage sale and thrift store finds or something we picked from curbside trash. Their beds had matching comforters and were always made up neatly. We played in huge fields by their house, but the house itself made more of an impression on me than anything we did. Dawn didn't realize how extravagant her environment was compared to mine, and I marveled at the luxury of her family's everyday life. Dawn and her mother and siblings worked at Michael's Appliance, but they put in far fewer hours than any of the LeBarons. The Jordans typically sauntered in between 11 and 12 in the noon, many times carrying fast food cups and bags of leftovers from their meal. We knew their mom or dad had taken time to drive through for the cheeseburgers and fries. When Dawn passed by me, I got a whiff of that mouth-watering hamburger smell. I tried not to breathe in so deeply, but I knew it was the closest I was likely to get to a fast food burger. Dawn's family members didn't work much or for very long, leaving around 5 p.m. I imagined them sitting down for dinner at an actual table instead of trying to balance sandwiches and a glass of tap water while standing in the grimy warehouse. In time, I learned to swallow my disappointment and envy. The situation was what it was. Internalizing my feelings didn't hurt anyone but me. Dawn never knew anything about how I felt. On the first day of my last summer break in Denver, which was actually no break at all, Dan called all the employees together in the repair shop area of the warehouse. Celia, Hiram, and I speculated about his agenda. I wonder if he has news about Dad, Hiram said, sounding hopeful. I wonder if we're in trouble, Celia said. I didn't have any more likely suggestions, so I waited for Dan to speak. Michael's Appliances is paying Ervil's legal expenses, and lawyers cost a lot of money. We need to work even harder to help him get out of jail. I'm going to offer each of you an incentive for the summer. If you will work harder than ever, I'll give each of you a $50 bonus to spend on new school clothes. His arms were outstretched, and he had a big smile on his face when he finished. Do y'all think he really gave that money to Ervil? Because if y'all living the way y'all living, and y'all spending the stuff y'all spending, what portion of it is going to the attorney? It's just me, speculating here. Y'all tell me what you think. We all clapped and cheered. For the first time ever, Dan had offered hope in the form of something tangible. Celia leaned over and whispered in my ear, "Can you imagine how many clothes we could buy with $50? I grinned broadly and embraced her. I love to have some new jeans. At 12 years old, I come to notice how much clothing mattered in school. Our donated clothes and hand-me-down items look ratty compared to what our fellow students wore. I know, me too. And maybe some new shoes. Both of my pairs have gotten so dirty from working in this place. On the way home that evening, Mom brought up Dan's incentive. What do you kids think? We chattered about what we would buy with the money. She listened to each of us describe what we previously only wished for but now saw in our grasp. My siblings and I worked extra hard all summer, often staying until after 9 at night if needed. We scrubbed appliances until our necks were stiff and our backs and feet ached. Since we didn't wear gloves, our hands were red, dry, and chapped, but we worked with smiles on our faces. Using a razor scraper, I removed layers of dead, dried up roaches from the traps below the stoves and the refrigerators. We scraped mold off of everything and used muriatic, muriatic acid to remove the hard water stains of the washing machine lids. I gagged more times than I could count at the foul odors that assaulted me when I opened a refrigerator or a freezer that had been sitting for weeks on end, a giant petri dish for bacteria and who knows what else. Through it all, the promise of a reward at the end kept us going and lightened the mood when we grew tired or missed having free time to play. Rosemary was sometimes put in charge of inspecting our work. Each time one of us finished cleaning a dryer or a range, we called out her name and asked her to inspect the appliance. If we missed something, Rosemary would point it out with her long, bony index finger, or if we did a good job, she would give us a thumbs up. Refurbished appliances were put on dollies and moved into the showroom adjacent to the warehouse area. The preferred sister wives, dressed in nice clothing, worked in this sought-after area. Occasionally, other sister wives, including my mom, were allowed to work in the showroom, particularly if they were good at sales. As summer drew to a close, our anticipation had reached a fever pitch. About 5 o'clock on the Saturday before school started, Dan called all the sister wives in the showroom. We kids tried to temper our enthusiasm, but couldn't hide our excitement. The warehouse had a festive feeling like never before. A few minutes later, the sister wives returned, faces downcast. Mom didn't look directly at any of us, but just said as she passed, "Let's go. Load up the car, please." Celia grabbed our mother's arm. "Mom, what happened?" Mom turned and repeated curtly, "Did you hear me? Get in the car now." We followed her out in a single file and crammed into the station wagon. No one spoke until we had turned out to the warehouse parking lot and headed for the house. Kathleen finally broke the silence. Mom, what's wrong? Didn't Dan give you your $50? Sort of. Celia and I exchanged glances and shrugged. Kathleen opened her mouth to ask another question, but Mom spoke first. I have the money. Then, in a low voice, as though she didn't trust herself to speak more loudly, Mom relayed what had happened in their meeting. Dan gave me $50, but only $50. Apparently, the business didn't do as well as he had hoped, which meant he didn't have enough to give each child the $50 he promised. He was only able to give out that amount per family. Since Mom also cared for Mary Lou's and Beverly's children, that meant we had to split our meager bonus with 7 other kids besides the 7 of us. So if she cared for other people's kids, why couldn't he give her $50 for each one of those kids too? She should have got $150 at least. This is the stuff I'm talking about. Someone did the math and announced that the individual share was about $3.57. Murmurs erupted front to back throughout the car, and they grew in intensity and volume. Herbert finally said aloud what we were all thinking. That's not fair. Maybe not, Mom replied. But Dan's in charge, and we have to trust that he's doing God's work and that he knows what's best for all of us. At that moment, I didn't want to hear about Dan Jordan's excellent leadership skills. I didn't want Mom to make an excuse for such a mean, unfair man. I didn't want to be envious that the other sister wives didn't have as many children in their care, which meant their children each got more to spend on their back to school clothes. I didn't want to deal with the crushing disappointment of working all summer for something that could so easily and swiftly be taken away. Instead, I just sat there and listened to Mom try to be cheery about going shopping the next day. We'll go to the thrift store. Won't that be fun? I'll admit it, that we did enjoy picking out a few shirts and jeans from an actual clothing rack in a store rather than sifting through a Goodwill collection bin. I chose 2 shirts, one red and one powder blue, both with the word Foxy on the front, across the front. I wore the powder blue one to the first day of school the next morning. In fact, I wore both new shirts twice that week. In addition, I got a pair of jeans and a pair of shoes that had been marked half price. I went slightly over my school clothing allotment, but not by much. I could hardly fathom what I might have been able to get if I had an entire 50 to spend. The following Sunday, we headed to one of the sister wives' houses for church. Celia, Hiram, and I sat on the floor of the crowded living room awaiting Leslie, our Sunday school teacher. The smell of burnt bread lingered in the air from breakfast earlier that morning. Suddenly, the front door opened, and in walked Dan Jordan's family. Dan and his wife headed to the back room for their class, but the kids crossed the living room to stand in the doorway to the dining room. I watched Dawn walk across the rust-colored shag carpet. She wore a brand new dress with a big bow tied in the back, matching tights, and a new pair of shoes. Dawn didn't make eye contact with anyone, but everyone stared at her, especially me. Her siblings had new clothes too. Are we surprised that they had new clothes? Because I'm not. Because it seems to me like, this is a thing. This is the thing that we're going to sit here and enjoy the benefits of this money and your hard work when we only came into the place for a couple hours at like 12 and left at 5. Meanwhile, your family of more than 7 has $50 to buy clothing with. I'm telling y'all, I couldn't do it. So Dan couldn't afford to give us money for new clothes. He blamed us for not working hard enough. How could 12 hours a day, 6 days a week not be enough? I felt myself flushing red with rage and disappointment. It seemed evident that Dan took our hard-earned money and spent it on his own children, who didn't even work half as much as we did in that filthy, disgusting warehouse. I knew making a scene wouldn't do any good. I choked down my feelings of resentment, bitterness, and betrayal, just like the bean sandwiches we ate every day that summer in the warehouse. But those feelings burrowed deep inside my soul to fester and grow. And that's how we're going to end this week's reading. I personally feel like they have been given the bad end of the stick, or whatever the saying is, throughout this thing. I feel like she has been suffering. I feel like she and her family get treated poorly. But what can you say? As I said earlier, go ahead and like the video for me. Let me know your thoughts on this reading. Until next time.